My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we continue to share together the extraordinary story of Samson from Judges chapter 15, a most unique servant of the Lord in the Scriptures. His whole life seems to be self-centered, but he is included in the Hall of Fame, Hebrews 11, as a man of great faith. He trusted God, and God worked through him. His whole life was dedicated to God, even though he does things which we scratch our head at and wonder. These don't seem to be standard for God's children. His birth was remarkable, because his mother was barren, until the Lord Jesus comes and tells her she shall have a son, and she is to avoid the fruit of the vine, because he shall be a Nazarite. He is not to eat the fruit of the vine. He is not to touch the dead. He is not to cut his hair. And the Lord stands by him throughout his life. He had seen a Philistine girl that appealed to him, and he sought to marry her. And during the week-long marriage celebrations, he gives her companions the challenge, a riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. The basis of the riddle was that he had been attacked by a lion. He had killed it. And when he came back and looked at the carcass, a colony of bees had settled in the carcass, and he took some of the honey. They couldn't resolve this, except that they put pressure on his bride, who eventually got the information from Samson himself. And then we find that Samson went down to Ashkelon. The power of the Lord came upon him to kill 30 men, to take their clothes, to give to his companions. And he went home in a huff, not taking his new wife, and they gave her to his best man. We continue the story in Judges 15. After a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go in to my wife, into her rooms." But her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, "I really thought you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please, take her instead." And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines, if I harm them." Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. Then he set the torches on fire, to let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Samson said to them, "Should you do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease." So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock at Etam. Now the Philistines went up, encamped in Judah, and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they said, "We've come to arrest Samson, to do to him as he has done to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock at Etam, and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this that you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." But they said to him, "We have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines." Then Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves." So they spoke to him, saying, "No, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand. But we will surely not kill you." And they bound him with 2 new ropes, and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men." And so it was, when he had finished speaking, that he threw the jawbone from his hand, and called the place Ramath-lehi. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord and said, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?" So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name En-hakkore, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. What an incredible story. How was Samson to be brought to the notice of the nation? The consequence of his father-in-law giving his wife to another man was that when Samson came to claim his wife and wanted to go in to her to consummate the marriage, he was not permitted. And the father-in-law said, "No, you can take her younger sister, but I've given her to your best man," which was completely illegal, for marriage is the strongest relationship and the foundational relationship, the relationship that God established between Adam and Eve. Adam knew his wife, and they conceived. And so it was that Samson reacted by catching 300 foxes, a pretty incredible task, and putting torches between their tails and letting them go. The foxes ran off in all directions, burning the wheat crops and that had been harvested and that was still waiting to be harvested, as well as the olive groves and the vineyards. Well, this displeased the Philistines, who said, "Who set this fire?" And when they realized why it had happened, because everyone knew Samson did that against the Timnite, they went and killed the Timnite, his father-in-law, and his wife, his whole family. They burned them with fire. Pretty rough justice on the Philistine part. Samson says that's not the right thing to do either. So he takes vengeance against the Philistines who had killed his wife. Now, the larger company of Philistines come up and say, "We must take out Samson. He's hiding." So they come against Judah, and 3,000 men of Judah go against Samson to fetch him from his hiding place, because they are submitting to the authority of the Philistines, their overlords. They don't realize that God has appointed Samson to be their judge. That's why he can do these extraordinary things. God has appointed him. They promised not to kill him themselves, but to hand him over. Later the chief priests would challenge Jesus, "Who gave you authority?" But his authority came from God, and they handed him over to the Romans for execution. When Samson was handed over to the Philistines, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him mightily again. Whenever Samson does extraordinary things, it is because God gives him that extraordinary power to do these things. The brand new ropes, strong ropes that bound him, became like burnt flax. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and used that as his weapon and killed 1,000 of the Philistines. But that was an extraordinary physical exercise, and he was exhausted at the end of it, and he felt as if he's going to die of exhaustion. He calls out to the Lord, and the Lord causes the rock to split, that his spirit might be revived by the water. And so we have a picture here of the Lord Jesus fighting the enemy and being revived, resurrection, when the rock is split, when the grave is open. Now Samson has caught the attention of the Israelites, and he becomes their judge. Though the Philistines still rule, he judges Israel for 20 years.